Hello everyone, welcome to the landscape here at Strawbery Banke Museum. Now, apples are coming out, produce is coming out, in general, lots of ingredients coming out in our gardens this time of year. Now, throughout history, preserving the harvest in several ways was very important, in particular to New Englanders because of our short growing season. Now, as we approached fall historically, winter, farmers, gardeners were doing many different methods to preserve ingredients coming out of their gardens. These ingredients could have been medicinal ingredients like spices and herbs. They could be associated with foodways like apples and plums and pears and squash and pumpkin. All sorts of different methods to preserve those ingredients that are actively growing and coming out during summertime. Whether we're pickling or fermenting certain things, allowing us to have those ingredients, have those foods, have those medicines all the way into our winter months. Now, apples here at Strawbery Banke are certainly associated with a lot of table fruit, but it's also associated with the importance of apple cider vinegar. Now, there are many methods beyond preserving things with apple cider vinegar that allowed people throughout history to preserve the harvest. Now, smoke and fire or the sunlight allowed people to preserve many things in a hearth or outside, allowing people to extract moisture. Dehydration was one of the simplest ways to preserve the harvest, and certainly other methods associated with salt and sugar. Microbes don't really like salt, sugar, smoke, and certainly the removal of moisture. So these different preservation methods allowed people to not only preserve the harvest, but make it safe to eat long periods of time. Let's go check out the produce that's coming out this time of year, and we'll see those reflections and a few options that we can consider for pickling, fermenting, or maybe just dehydrating in the sun. Let's go check things out. Here are some heirloom tomatoes, specifically Pomaderino heirloom tomato. This is traditionally a dried tomato in kitchens and clusters, similar to how we braid onions and garlic. Now, there are a ton of root crops that can be preserved, and extending those ingredients into the winter months through a process of pickling or fermenting, amongst other concoctions that will sustain these ingredients into the cold season. Now, this is bull's blood beet in the Victory Garden. Now, let's take a look at this one, which I think is perfect. And there we go. Now, I think the perfect size with a beet is just beyond a golf ball size. Here we have Reliance Peach behind the Shapiro House. Now, peaches can be pickled or fermented. You know, from mangoes to peaches to nectarines and all sorts of different fruits that we often will eat with table fruit can certainly be put into the pickling process as well. All right, everyone, here we have a few examples of pickles, cordial, and a few crocks. All the way on your far left, we have redware, which is historic for many centuries and certainly the early colonial period. These crocks allowed many people to either ferment or pickle their produce and certainly meats as well. Often you would have covered this with a cloth or maybe some type of barrier on the top, or if not, right on top of your recipe. So be very careful that you're doing things appropriately, from sanitation and certainly incorporating the appropriate ingredients like salt, sugar, vinegar. Sometimes people don't use enough salt through certain recipes, and you can get spoiling with these processes. These types of crocks were certainly popularized by the 19th century. So ceramics associated with these types of vessels became very popularized. Often we would actually cut or design tops, often wood tops for these, beyond our glass version. Certainly those mason jars that also came out in the 19th century. So the first one in the jar is a simple dill pickle with a bit of spice. Fennel, spicy pepper. This one's actually really savory and spicy. I absolutely love it. This one is using white wine vinegar as opposed to other types of vinegars to preserve. Next, we have a sweet pickle. As opposed to savory recipes, we sweeten this up with sugar. So this is, again, cucumber, but a little bit more sweet versus that savory recipe. So really playing around with those ingredients. In this one, a bit of spice in here, including sweet onion, but certainly associated with those sweeter crops if you prefer a sweet pickle versus a savory pickle. Next is one of my favorite crops to mention, especially when talking about the 19th century. This is Meyer lemon pickle. Even before it was ready to harvest, maybe things were too small, maybe you had drops coming out of your bushes or shrubs, and even those drops coming out of fruit trees were essentially put into pickling processes. Just imagine getting table fruit off the tree directly was that high-end crop, but how much food people were traditionally losing out of the tree as they dropped to the ground. A lot of those apples and fruits were certainly associated with fermented beverages like hard cider, but they were often pickling those drops as well to really get as much food out of that produce as possible. Just consider that as well. Meyer lemon and white wine vinegar. Now next is the elderberry cordial. This is actually from last year. And I utilize this for medicine as opposed to a cocktail or spirit to drink. Elderberry cordialed in vodka for about 3 months, very simple. And sometimes, often people will add a little bit of sugar or some spice to it. Often a lot of people will add lemon to a cordial of elderberry to complement those kind of savory, sweet aromas of elderberry. You can certainly make simple syrups with it with sugar if you are not a fan of consuming alcohol. So there are many other ways to preserve elderberry beyond cordialing, so just consider that. Next, we have fire cider. Now, fire cider is basically apple cider vinegar along with all sorts of savory aspects of ingredients and spice, bringing that up, lifting that up to more of a savory medicinal concoction. Now, fire ciders, unlike just regular apple cider, is loaded with spice, including turmeric and coriander, sometimes very spicy peppers. This is great for boosting your immune system, cold remedies, cough remedies. It really energizes the body and gives you quite a good feeling just sipping on this. Very spicy stuff, so you don't want to consume too much of it depending on your palate. So fire cider, excellent, especially in the winter months as you're trying to boost your immune functions. Now, one of the most exciting pickles I have on the table is associated with fruit dropping too early out of the tree or harvested early baby peaches. Yes, you can pickle baby peaches. Now, last but not least, we have a SCOBY in a mason jar with a little bit of tea. Now, a SCOBY is basically a symbiotic relationship between bacteria and yeast. Now, this goes back centuries in order to make fermented tea that we know as kombucha. Sometimes you'll start a SCOBY or feed a SCOBY with a kombucha that you purchased because of the living aspect of a SCOBY being that symbiotic relationship between yeast and bacteria. You need to actually take care of this living culture. So at this point, it is actively growing and actively feeding. You know, checking on this every now and then is ideal. Be very careful. SCOBYs can spoil on you. Like many aspects of fermentation and pickling and preserving, you have to be very careful with spoiling. As long as you're taking care of your supplies, keeping things clean, watching the activity throughout the process to make this process safe on your end. Give it a try, it's a lot of fun, and certainly the learning process utilizing different ingredients and different ways. Happy summer, everyone. This is Strawbery Banke.